Smashboard, your digital ally to smash patriarchy.
This episode of SmashLIVE, we are with NACIRA GUENIF-SOUILAMAS, who we can't see yet. She's a professor at University of Paris VIII, and she's also a sociologist and an activist. Also joining us is ROKHAYA DIALLO from Paris also. She's a journalist and filmmaker. She has to run right after our show because there's breaking news happening. So she's very kindly agreed to come and quickly join us and talk about women and anger. So that really is the subject of discussion today for our SmashLIVE show. We will be joining Belle OLID and TANIA VERGE in a while, and hopefully NACIRA's video will show. Hi NACIRA, welcome to SmashLIVE.
Hello, hi everybody. Thank you for having me.
So ROKHAYA and NACIRA, I just wanted to show you this. This is a book that Soraya has written. She hasn't been able to join us because she's in Australia and it's like really late there right now. But she has written an entire book on the power of women's anger. And I'll ask you this question first, ROKHAYA. You know, you are very present in the media as well as on social media, and you get a lot of rage. But from what I have seen, you really hold yourself back. How do you deal with this anger? I mean, what are the kinds of anger that you feel? One is, of course, the righteous anger, which is about oppression. And the other is all these assaults that keep happening on you all the time. You are very often harassed. On Twitter, we've seen that. We try to come to your support, but that's something that you deal with your daily life. How do you handle all of this?
I try to think about the difference that there is between my public figure and the person I am really. So I think that it's more a symbol of what I stand for that gets anger than me, myself as a person. And that's how I can handle that. And I get anger and rage on social media, but also from other public figures, like in TV debates or people who write about me. And to me, it's because I work on oppression, on sexism and racism, and you cannot tackle such issues without provoking anger. It's impossible because it's systemic. And whenever you tackle something systemic, you have to disturb people who are privileged and who are, who accommodate with the situation.
Right. I'll come to you now, NACIRA. How do you look at women's anger, in the sense that for you yourself, you have written extensively, about a lot of problems that are there within feminism and how we negotiate all the discourse around, the several intersections of oppression that play together. How do you personally, as a woman, deal with this anger, and how do you think is it perceived by other people?
Well, I think that first of all, this is something that you have to become aware of, because sometimes you can, without really realizing not only how it completely overwhelms you, and at the same time, because it is overwhelming you, you cannot drive it in some sense that it can become meaningful. I think that first, anger is something that needs a very high level of awareness in order to become efficient and politically in a position to build agency, not just for you, but for the groups that you intend to belong to in the face of oppression. So right. I think that just naturally anger doesn't make it. It's all about how you construct it, you envision the task that it can do for you. I think that's the first thing.
Also, anger, ROKHAYA, I just wanted to talk about, the collective action, because quite often anger is something that leads to collective action. And I will ask CARMELA, who is behind the scenes, to perhaps play one of the videos. We know CARMELA and I were together in the 8M march in Barcelona, and there was so much energy there. There were all these women who had come out in the streets. Some of them had been in the streets right from the morning. In their districts, and then they joined the big march that was happening. And this happened in many cities in Spain, where this kind of a collective anger is also leading to collective action, because anger is also something that makes a kind of demand on people. What would you say about that anger, ROKHAYA?
About I think it's anger, but it's also hope. Like people are angry, but they feel like they have an agency. They have the leverage to do something and to push things to change. So that means that it's something very um, really fed with hope, with hope and with the feeling, with the how can I say that, the conviction that they will be able to make a difference. And to me, it's not only anger; it's something that is meant to transform the society and to act on it.
Right. But what about the fact that sometimes anger also comes after despair, in the sense that, you have fought something and it's something that is not changing. And then there is another kind of anger that comes with a bitterness and despair. Uh, and then there's another anger which is that of solidarity and one of difference. How do you negotiate between all these? In the sense that, when you are working with other feminists who probably are not from your location, for example, in France, mainly a lot of visible feminism is white feminism. How do you think that women of color and black women deal with that disappointment and despair that they sometimes might feel? Do you think that could sometimes get converted into anger as well?
It's not something new because women of color, we are at the intersections of many oppressions. It means that we can be oppressed by male, obviously, but also by white females, and we need to have that in mind all the time. The idea that we have to support every woman, whatever happens, is not. It doesn't apply for women of color because we know that we've been used and men of color have been used to promote a certain kind of feminism that was only benefiting to white women. So what is difficult is to try to support the global agenda of feminism, but at the same time not to be a tool against other people of color, especially men or people of color who are not women. So it's something that we have to deal with, but we don't have to make any mistake on the fact that all the women are not supportive of what we stand for.
Rokhaya, just one more question to you that I wanted to ask, which is that, a lot of times there's also uh, this kind of image that is projected of the angry black woman, which is a very damaging kind of image that, kind of invalidates everything that black women are trying to say. So there is also a level of mockery that's made and a kind of stereotype that is sometimes constructed for black women, that, black women are always angry, as if it's inherent in their nature and it's not something which is a response of oppression.
Yes, that there is this stereotype of angry black woman, and it's very difficult for us to express our rage without being seen as like just emotionally unable to channel our emotions or feelings. So it's something that we have to deal with, but we don't have at the same time to fit in the way people would like to see us, like as very quiet, non-threatening, and not like not challenging.
What about the stereotype of the angry black woman? Do you think that it's really damaging is it like a kind of means of silencing women? What do you think about that stereotype that's made?
I think that the stereotype is much more present in the US than in France because it's to me. I have the feeling that it's much more known and widespread in the US than in France. As a woman, I would say that whenever you're angry, if you are a woman, whether you're black or not, you're seen as being hysterical. I
Right.
remember, like, for example, in 2007, when Ségolène Royal was running for presidency, and when she was having that debate before the second round, she
Yes.
just she said that she was angry, and Nicolas Sarkozy, who would be elected after as a president, said, "Oh, you shouldn't be angry that way. If you are not able to manage yourself, to channel yourself, I don't think you'll be able to be a president." And it's something that is very, very damaging to women, whether they're black or white or whatever.
Also, Hillary Clinton, who was constantly interrupted by Trump, she hardly ever, displayed any anger.
Yeah, and even like, but for real, I can say that I'm someone very calm, and I think I'm kind of smiling person. But whenever I say something that is disturbing, people would say she's aggressive. And I don't think I am aggressive as a person. And I think it wouldn't matter if I was, but I don't think I am. But I think that people felt attacked by what I say. What I say, because I say things about oppression, about racism, that is
Just check, please.
yes, it's not it's not acceptable to hear such things in France. So saying something disturbing for the majority as a Black woman seems aggressive.
We just want to go to Tania Verge. Carmela, if you could please play Tania Verge's interview and tell me that it's playing. And then in the meantime, we can try to fix NACIRA's camera as well. So we can all do a three-way.
I have in mind this relatively recent documentary about US feminism, which is called She's Beautiful When She's Angry. And this is not just something that is relevant for the women's movement, but more generally for social movements. So mobilizing anger, putting anger to use to fight for common purposes, it's very powerful, and it's very useful in the struggle for social transformation. And in the case of Spain, we have seen these very huge demonstrations and strikes during Women's International Day, both this year as well as last year. And it builds on an accumulated anger that draws on two different things. One is some years ago, the Conservative Party, the Popular Party, tried to reform the abortion law to make it more restrictive. And it was a moment in which women from all across the country united to fight against this bill, and we managed to defeat it. And it was out of anger. So how can it be that still in the 21st century women have to be vindicating basic sexual and reproductive rights? And I think the Me Too movement, but also the local ramifications, which have been very powerful as well in Spain, have socialized this anger, or have put this anger into motion. So many women might not have identified or self-identified as feminists, but all of us have experienced different forms of sexual harassment. So this mobilization has also drawn this anger, right, to stop this from happening, and again to vindicate that still in the 21st century we still don't have guaranteed the right to physical integrity, sexual integrity, or psychological integrity.
You know, it's interesting because I was just yesterday in Madrid and I was talking to a very strong woman and who had agreed to give me an interview and talk about, women who are assertive and who are angry and who take initiative and do a lot of things, strong women. Which most women are really. She was, like you said, that not all women identify themselves as feminists. Now she was actually really angry with feminists. She was saying that feminists try to posit themselves as victims. And when I tried to tell her that that's not the case, she was so upset that she actually just walked off. What about the anger between women?
Between those self-define as feminists, as those who don't? Do you mean that?
All kinds of, like there could be this, where there was one person who wasn't comfortable with identifying herself with her feminist. She didn't say she wasn't one, but she was upset with the way feminism, well, according to her, feminists actually posit women as victims or survivors, and she detests that. Then there could also be the anger between women, which Audre Lorde had also spoken about, where she said that this could actually be productive, where perhaps women of color, black women, and between white women and black women there could be a certain anger as white women try to recognize their privileges and so on and so forth. Depending on our locations, between women also, obviously, we are not all the same, like you said. And yet when in Barcelona and in other cities also, when one sees all the women spilling out, at that time they are united. But there's also the anger between women. How do you think should we address that?
I think we haven't been trained, or we haven't been socialized to deal with anger. We need to be retrained in how to deal with it, both to vindicate as well as to make us aware of things that we had not seen before, or we had not critically examined before, as the case of the criticisms coming from Black feminism or decolonial feminism or other strands of feminism. But also, I'm emphasizing the point that we are not trained to deal with anger, because when women relate to each other, very often we do so on the basis of friendship, or we work together for a cause. We
Solidarity.
in solidarity, and then we become friends. And sometimes we tend to, and I think many of us, or we have been in situations in which this anger has ended up friendship, or has put friendship into a delicate position. And I think it's because we are not used to dealing with that, right? So many criticisms might end up becoming personal rather than a political issue. That, I mean, the personal is political, but what, you know what I mean? That
So basically what you're saying is that we shut down when there is anger rather than address it and see why in the first place is this anger present.
yeah, we tend to repress anger instead of going into the root. And anger is one derivative from the preceding ones, right? While women are perceived to be more modest, more passive, then anger is an out of place situation, right? It's breaking the somatic norm of what's expected from a woman. So I guess, yes, this makes angry women, or when a woman is angry, be perceived as very out of place.
And we were talking about how women are mostly conditioned to grow not being angry. But the fact of the matter is that most of us are facing a lot of oppression, if not direct sexual abuse and assault. And there are ways in which we are trying to redefine the way in which we deal with this anger, because anger is mostly seen as a negative or dangerous expression, especially in the case of men, where most of the times when you see anger, you have to be cautious because it could turn into violence. And the same standard is actually applied to women. But when women are angry, basically they're making a demand and drawing boundaries. So it's not the same thing as the entitled anger of men or of another privileged group. Would that be right? What do you think?
Yes, I think there's a different status of anger when it comes to women as about men, and especially the fact that they need the expression of anger most of the time in order to be able to move beyond a status of being silenced and of being put in such situation that they cannot express what they have to say. So anger is the first step, often, for moving forward into a wider expression, articulating experiences that otherwise would remain silenced, and especially about putting oneself at the same level of men. I mean, that's interesting that men would always say that women who are expressing anger are losing their temper and expressing some sort of irresponsibility or lack of mastering their own emotions. And I would rather say that this is a way to silence them again, even when they are angry, because very interestingly, anger allows women to put themselves in the same status and at the same level as men. The only difference is that men don't need that in order to not only enjoy but perform all the privileges that are granted to them. So I think it's a way to express and make visible the lack of entitlement and the absence of rights that the women can experience.
Anger also has a cost attached to it. So if you express anger, it's also something that you can get punished for expressing that anger, right?
But what is seen as anger, whether you're a man or a woman, is not the same. As a woman, you even saying what you think is seen as being angry. So that means that the price to pay to express what you stand for, what you feel, what you want to see changing is very, very high compared to what a man can be exposed to. So that means that, yes, you have to think very deeply about what you say, before saying it, because it can really exclude you from the society, from the public sphere. It has many consequences.
Also, a lot of times, ROKHAYA and NACIRA, this is for you as well, the response to anger could either be dismissal or it could be dialogue. In the sense that if somebody is angry, basically they're trying to say, look, there's something that we are trying to say that you're not listening to. So when we are angry, we are trying to say, please listen to us, right? So it is an attempt to start a dialogue. Whereas mostly what happens as a result of anger is that you're completely dismissed. If, of course, there's not retaliation in exchange, because, you know, anger can also lead to retaliation. Like ROKHAYA said, we have to be careful. These are the kind of like things that women have to deal with constantly, which again also leads to problems of health, for instance, because practically all of us have to every day try to measure our anger, don't we? So about this dismissal and dialogue aspect of anger, do you feel that there is a difference in the way in which this ought to be perceived and the way it usually is? That rather than as a call for dialogue, it's usually used as an excuse to dismiss, which is also where tone policing comes in.
So I would say that in both ways, it is very good news, because either there is a reaction of dismissal towards the expression of anger of women, and then it says something about the disruption of the status quo that has been reached and has been in some ways gained and won upon men who try to maintain the status quo. Or for those who are intelligent enough and open enough, I mean, able to maybe resign some of their privileges, for those, then it means that there is something that's out of it that has to do with acknowledging the necessity of dialogue. It's good news that anger may trigger any kind of reactions. Either it is about acknowledging the disruption that is happening, and so it means that in such ways the status quo is being challenged and to some extent destroyed. And so, of course, that for some men and for some groups, even including white women, for example, this leads to a dismissal of the expression of anger and what sustains it. But it says something. It is bringing to visibility something that so far was undercover. Or on the other hand, if the expression of anger leads to dialogue, it means that it has led some of the of men and of white women to understand that they need to resign some of their privileges and some of their power position in order to make space for this expression, so that it doesn't have to be elaborated under anger, that there are other regimes that can be welcomed and accommodated.
Carmela, if you can just come to ROKHAYA now on air, because she's about to leave us, and we are saying goodbye to her and asking her to give her concluding remarks on whether or not there can be something which could be a blend of both happy and angry, a kind of righteous anger, a kind of legitimate anger, and also, you know, a kind of self-assertion, as it were. Carmela, will you come to ROKHAYA now, please?
Yes, I think that being able to express your anger and all your emotions leads to happiness. I think that if you're not able to express that, or if you're not heard, that's unhappiness. And I don't think that you need to make people comfortable to be happy, because that's what about anger is that it makes people uncomfortable, and that they would criticize you for being angry. But at the end of the day, if you need to be angry, to express anger and to act on it, it's up to you, and it's for yourself. So you need not to put the others' feelings before yours, because at the end of the day, if you want to emancipate yourself and to be happy, you need to listen to yourself.
Thank you so much. You joined us despite all your sort of busy schedule. You're looking exhausted also, and you have to run to get to the breaking news. Thanks so much, and we'll see you another time on another show. Thanks so much, ROKHAYA. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. Now coming back to NACIRA. So yeah, that was very interesting. In fact, this whole balance that we were talking about. But there's also another thing that I think women have to do, and especially women of at least my mother's generation, where, the anger just keeps mounting, in the sense that, it's like slowly you keep controlling yourself, and then, just explodes in one way or the other, whether it's just sort of just in the form of frustration, or maybe even just like giving up. Some women also just give up. They're like just so fed up after a while. Others continue being angry. Like I remember that when we were children, a lot of times when our mother used to be angry, she used to grind her teeth, but she wouldn't say anything. So it's also this, and Soraya, who's written this book on rage, she talks about this drip, of this like a constant dripping and mounting of anger that happens. What do you think is going to be different really for women who are in a different location, like as a woman of color living in France? You have also spoken about violence. Now, violence is interlaced also with anger, right? How have you seen women around you deal with anger? Like I said that, Soraya said that her mother used to fling plates and break them and then come back and talk really calmly. I used to see my mother grind her teeth. How have you seen women around you express their anger? And we are talking about it really lightly, but this is something actually that hurts our health and our well-being.
Of course, it does hurt. And, I think that the first experience that women have with anger is to turn it into violence against themselves. And to experience this kind of intimate relation to violence as something that becomes part of their everyday life, that they have to face day to day and from 1 hour to another. I mean, the fact that they could not express their anger, and especially what triggers it, what makes it so overwhelming, is something that has led for many women to some sort of intimate and internal violence against themselves. So this is why it's so important to be able to decipher all kinds of messages that we get from women or from oppressed individuals or groups, because it is something of the level of anger that they experience and to the level of helplessness that they express to the point that they can become violent against themselves. And the violence turns into, it's kind of turned against the group, against one's life, against one's balance in life. So
right.
You balance because you cannot express something that has become vitally disturbing to you.
Right. So I have a question from Monica Narula. Well, it's not such a funny question, but nevertheless, it makes me laugh. There was this story about a woman called Lorena Bobbitt. I don't know if you remember. She castrated a man, and a lot of times. So Monica is saying that she sometimes feels overwhelming anger and doesn't know what to do with it, because expressing it always leads to her being punished in one way or the other.
Yeah, I could completely relate to that. And the fact that women have not been raised as girls in the perspective of expressing their emotions, and especially emotions triggered by oppression, is something that may lead to this feeling of being completely overwhelmed, and sometimes having to express it in such violent ways that also completely contradicts the vision that the society in general and men, I mean dominant men, I mean hegemonic white male perspective projects on women. is the fact that they cannot be violent and that they are naturally non-violent. This is something that is a way also to silence their anger. And it shouldn't be a surprise that for some of them, it has led an outrageous level of violence against either the men that they live with or with other men. I mean, the fact that it should, at some point, it may burst in such ways is something that is narrowly related to the kind of monitoring and control that is imposed on women about their emotions, about the anger that will inevitably be triggered by their life experience, because they are doomed to some extent that to either kind of level to oppression and to domination.
Also, another thing is that, you know, not just like extreme anger, but also even mild discontent that women might express can lead to very serious consequences. For example, just to give you our own example, you know, in Smashboard, we were working with men who were doing some of the coding and technology for us. And even expressing a slight discontent can actually lead to like extreme anger on their behalf. And one of the people who was in the tech team actually urged me and said that, please talk to us with love and we'll do anything for you, which basically meant that he wanted, no matter what they did, the group of men, they didn't want us to ever complain, and also do the emotional labor of not only suppressing our anger, but also appeasing them and asking them to do, which obviously for me is like, you know, increased frustration, you know, because anger can have a lot of ways of functioning. So in the workplace especially, you know, women are supposed to fall in line even more. So this kind of sort of negotiation can actually never really happen unless and until women have more rights. They are better represented in areas, you know, in work where they have more rights. And let's not talk about women who are working within households, who are facing everyday casteism, who have absolutely no right to express any anger. This is actually, I would say, not letting people express their anger would be a kind of violation of human rights, especially if they are an oppressed or marginalized group, right?
Of course, it's a way to intimidate them and to force them to comply with the taken for granted image of women. And that's interesting that you would mention this notion of express one. Whatever you have to ask for, ask it with a smile. And sometimes the fact that, you know, that's something interesting that men, even well intentioned, would often tell you, you know, you don't smile enough, and you don't present yourself under your best. I mean, you know, you could look much more attractive or more. You could even make points just by underlining them with a smile. And this is
absolutely,
something interesting about dismissing and preventing any kind of what may be called aggressivity or being too offensive, and this leads, of course, to the notion of angriness and the anger that should not be. It's supposed to be there. It's not supposed to be visible, and it's not supposed to have any kind of consequences. So the best way to say that anger doesn't have any kind of consequences is to express this kind of general demand on women that they remind smiling subjects.
Right. There's a question that's just come in. It's from Aditi Bhatnagar. Aditi is asking, as girls, we are not taught to acknowledge or manage our anger so much as to fear, ignore, hide, and transform it. So I think she's making more of a comment over here. Aditi, yes, I absolutely agree that we are not taught how to deal with that anger. And in fact, that can also be quite dangerous. Because sometimes if girls are asked to consistently erase their anger, they could be in dangerous situations where anger could be actually a means of defining boundaries, where they could by not expressing that anger, they could actually be putting themselves into danger. In fact, Aditi, I'd like to show you this book. I happen to know Aditi. We have worked together before. So, hi, Aditi. Here's a book that I've got, NACIRA, Stella, Scream as Loud as You Can. It's by Belle OLID, who we interviewed, and we've lined up that interview. We're having a lot of technical difficulties today, so I'm terribly sorry about that. Hopefully, we'll find a new way to do these lives the next time. But we spoke to Belle OLID. Now, she has written this book in which she's actually asking a child, a girl, to scream as loud as she can if there is something weird that's happening, if she's being touched wrongly or if she's being sexually abused. And we spoke to Belle OLID about this as well. Carmela, if you're ready with the Belle OLID, could we play that interview, please?
My name is Belle OLID. I am a translator and a writer, and currently and since 2015 I am the president of the Writers Association in Catalan language. I am very active in social media as a feminist and as an LGBT activist, and my work fighting patriarchy is basically everyday work, so it works in different levels. On one level is how I live my life and what rules do I obey and what rules I decide just not to obey, whether they are like legal rules or just social rules that I decide not to follow. Also by raising my children in a feminist way and LGBT friendly way, and the kind of relationships that I decide to establish, but also on a more like public level or political level. I am a writer, and my fiction characters are mostly women, because I think that's a way, flooding literature with women characters which are complex and not just accessories is a way of fighting patriarchy. But also I write divulgation, so like I write texts of basic feminism that everybody can read, and one of my latest books, Pocket Feminism, Feminisme de Butxaca, has reached the 7th edition in Catalan and is now being published in Spanish. So this is a few of the things that I do.
So then today we are talking about can I just take the mic from you, please? Yeah. Today we are talking about women's anger. There's been a book that Soraya Chemaly has written, Rage Becomes Her, and she talks about how women handle and suppress their anger and don't express it, and she's talked about that. And a lot of women are angry, aren't they? And that anger sometimes leads to people looking at us with suspicion. What do you think is the use of anger for women and the way it's looked at by people and the way you think it should be looked at?
Well, as women, we have been taught that there is no place for our anger and that we should be complacent and submissive, and at least act complacent and submissive, even if we don't feel like it. But I think anger has a very important role in our self-worth ideas. So if we think that something that is happening to us or that someone is doing to us, it's not okay, we feel anger, and that gives us a sense of self-worth. Like, I am worthy of respect, and people are not respecting me, or some men are not respecting me, or society is not respecting me, so I am allowed to be angry. So on a first level, it would be the first consciousness of being worthy, of being a human person and being treated as such. But then there's a second level in which anger can be like a drive to act and to change things in your life. So you feel angry all the time, something is wrong. It's like an alarm. There is something wrong in your life if you feel angry all the time. What can you do to change that? Is there like a first personal level at which you could do other stuff? Is there a political fight that will drive your anger towards positive stuff? For the March the 8th, a few days ago, I tweeted about some really angry slogans that we were going to sing and chant in the march, and which we did. And I got a lot of responses from men and from some women saying, this is very angry, we don't want violence, feminism is not about violence. And of course, I'm not going to kill any of the men who have been harassing me or being disrespectful, but I think being allowed to express it is a way of showing my anger and showing that I am worthy of respect. So I think we should be more flexible and not so literal about people expressing our anger, especially if we are from an oppressed community such as women or racialized women or LGBT communities or whatever.
We'll go back to Bell in just a while, NACIRA. We have a comment from Girja. He says, anger in white men is often portrayed as justifiable and patriotic, but in black men as criminality and in black women as threatening. In the Western world, anger in women has been widely associated with madness. Well, I think in the world where all around it has been associated with hysteria, right? And this hysteria is actually real because it's part of the trauma that women live, isn't it, NACIRA?
Of course, especially when you consider that the general assumption is that anger expressed by colored women or black women or Arab women is something that has to do with their internal and intrinsic violence. But I find it interesting to look at it as a way to completely disempower the level of subversiveness that lies in this kind of anger. I would think, for example, because we were talking about how black women are being viewed in the US, for example, and the fact that this angry black woman is often opposed to any kind of argument they are able to articulate, of course. But it's also the case when you think, and I think it has some colonial genealogy to it, that has to do with the way, for example, Arab women are viewed in the French society with relation to what was the fight against colonialism. And the way Arab women and colonized women in the French Empire were able to express their refusal and their denial of the legitimacy of the colonial rule. And there's this very interesting part of the book that Frantz Fanon wrote about the Algerian Revolution, in which he shows how, for example, Algerian women would express their resistance to the French colonial rule during the war against France by smiling. But that their smile was deeply rooted in their legitimate anger against the colonial rule and the colonialist power that was destroying their society. So I think it's a very interesting way to look at how you can connect smile and anger at the same time, in terms that when they are brought to the fore together, they become very subversive. And the denial of the legitimacy of the anger of those oppressed women, especially during colonial times, but we're still experiencing some of that now, has to do with the level of subversiveness that is being sensed and felt in the way these women are present, the way they embody their anger, and the way they can embody it to the level that they express it also in some paradoxical way.
Exactly. And what's also interesting is, and Soraya talks about, she quotes Audre Lorde in her book and says that, anger can also be loaded with information and energy, in the sense that there is a signal that's being sent out when anger is being expressed. To actually erase it, like I said earlier, it's actually a kind of violation of a person's rights, because A, you are oppressing them, B, you are being violent against them, and C, you are doubly punishing them if at all they are going to be saying anything. But at the same time, anger can also be an advantage, because it can push us to assert ourselves and say, no, this is not the way you do things. And I mean, it is, after all, the anger of women who came before us, our feminist foremothers, if I may say, or our foremothers who have consistently fought for things to be changed, that we are here today, that you and I can have an internet and be talking to each other, because there was a time when this was not possible, and there is still a time where women are not allowed to use their phones when they want to, or even own a phone. We'll just go back to listen to what Belle was saying earlier, about anger, and also about how women between themselves also have anger, you know, like women in different locations can be angry with each other. You know, a woman who portrays herself as a victim could have an issue with somebody else who she sees part of the proximal patriarchal power, because a lot of women also draw proximal patriarchal power. So just go back, let's just go back to Belle, please, Carmela.
You wrote a book also about Stella. Tell us a little bit about this book, about this little child, and you are actually exhorting her to scream. So you are encouraging her to be angry, is it?
My book is called Stella, Scream as Loud as You Can. Yeah. So, yeah. This is the book that I wrote for children, for very young children, Stella, Scream as Loud as You Can. And this is a book, it's a very basic book, and it's thought to provoke debate among grown-ups and children, because sexual abuse in childhood happens to children very obviously, but we never talk about it to them. So when we get to talk about it, it has already happened. So it doesn't make much sense. So it's as if you were trying to teach your children to cross the street safely once they have already been run over by a car. It doesn't make any sense at all. You try to talk to them before they cross the street alone. So this is my attempt at giving children some ways to deal with abuse, not only sexual abuse, but also sexual abuse. For example, if someone is doing something to you that you don't feel is right, that you should be allowed to say so, and that other person should stop. And if they don't stop, you look for help. And if there's no help around, you scream, because screaming is a way of you know, calling for attention and getting other people to help. So that's the scream. And in the story, the scream, Stella does get to scream after a very hard abuse, and she gets help. Someone comes, and, you know, her mom, her family comes to the rescue, which is not something that really happens in reality in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, families don't respond to help the victim, but I think it's good that children know that they should be helped, and that if their family doesn't help, they might find someone else. And so the scream is a way of saying, hey, there's a limit, this is my body, you are not allowed to touch my body in this way, also I need help, please help me. So it's expressing rage and expressing anger as a way of getting help.
Also, you know, a lot of times when women speak angrily or ask for something angrily, it's because they're trying to point out that something is happening which is not right. However, because we're expected to be submissive, when we're actually negotiating, trying to get justice, any kind of reparations, any restorative justice, or even seeking due process, we are constantly judged for being angry. So like when you say that you put up those tweets, and there were even some women who said that this is too angry, so they were apprehensive. How do we actually learn how to trust women who are angry? Because women can be angry with each other, women can be angry with a lot of things. We have enough reason to be angry, and then it depends on what our location is for us to be even angrier. And from woman to woman, you know, a white woman talking to a black woman or a woman of color, an upper caste woman talking to a woman who has been marginalized by the caste system. There are things that we find difficult to adjust with each other. How should women navigate other women's anger?
I think that as a woman, when navigating other women's anger, it's very important to have into account my position of privilege. So I am considered white in my society. I don't suffer from racism. I just don't suffer it. So when speaking to a woman of color or another person of color, I have to be very careful of not tone policing this person. Probably it's very easy for me to talk about racism without getting upset, because I am not suffering it. So it's not something that affects me personally. Even if I can get very upset that my friends of color are being targeted by racism, it's not something that affects me personally. So for me, it's easy to keep calm. But of course, when I am speaking to a person who gets angry, who gets upset, because they do have a personal experience of that kind of violence, it's not very productive to ask them to stay calm. So I shouldn't ask anyone to stay calm when they are suffering a violence that I am not suffering. I should just listen, understand, and let that person express all the frustration, anger, and sadness maybe about what happened to them without tone policing them. So stay calm is not something that we should say to another person when discussing a topic that does not affect us personally but does affect that other person personally.
Also, a lot of times people say, okay, say it in another way, say it politely. That's the other thing. But, you say that you would not tone police somebody. But what if this anger is directed towards you, rightly or wrongly? I would think that being the feminist that you are would be wrongly addressed. But, sometimes we don't know, How would you deal with something which could be directly addressed to you, or which you might take personally, in the sense that a lot of times, people are speaking to us because we belong to a privileged group. It's not a personal attack, but acknowledging that privilege when it actually comes to taking positions, helping someone or not, because anger is also sometimes making a demand on the other person that, okay, this is happening to me, I'm not happy with it, and automatically it's like, you need to do something about it. Otherwise, you're just walking away from me.
I have been addressed in very rude ways by other groups of people and by trans women, for example, who are very upset of my cis women privilege. And as tempted as I might feel to say, hey, I'm a really trans ally, and my son is trans, and my partner is trans, and I have read all these books, I might feel tempted to say, not all cis people, but my experience as a feminist has taught me that even if I don't feel that my attitudes are transphobic, I should listen when I am pointed out by a trans person and saying what you did is transphobic. And maybe I was being transphobic and I was just not aware of it. So my first reaction when I am targeted by this anger would be try not to feel offended and try not to take it personally. This is not anger against me as a person, but as me as a member of a privileged group, and I have a responsibility as a member of this privileged group to listen to these people who are pointing out maybe actions or statements that I might have uttered that actually they are right. Or maybe they are not, but at least I have to listen to them, think about it, discuss it, read, and educate myself about it to try to change stuff. So I cannot stop being racist, I cannot stop being transphobic from day to night just because I decide to. It's a process, and in that process that I'm not sure will ever be completed because education is very strong, I think one of the main steps is when someone screams at me, you're being transphobic or you're being racist, I think, yeah, I should listen. I should listen to this anger, I should listen to this expression and analyze what I have done to contribute to this transphobic discourse or to this racist discourse, and really reevaluate my actions and see how I can help better. Maybe just by listening and saying, you are right, I am really sorry and I hadn't thought about it and thank you very much for pointing that out, is already a way of helping. And then, of course, I can help further by taking other actions.
What we were saying a while ago about women expressing anger, and Belle, of course, has been saying in her book, Stella, scream as loud as you can. So her point being that, we have to realize that, anger is a useful emotion for us. But there's also the other thing, NACIRA, that we were talking about a while ago, as to how, toxic masculinity actually expects men to be angry. Mm-hmm. It's like, anger is a normalized emotion for men. Whereas when women get angry, they're seen as very threatening. They are disliked, seen as suspicious, and actually sometimes even excluded, in the sense that any woman expressing dissatisfaction or anger is seen as, in a way, kind of like emasculating,
When it comes to anger, division of labor. And obviously, whatever is granted to men is refused to women. And in that respect, the question of anger is something that has been solved a long time ago by men who said that this belongs to their genuine way of expression, And therefore, anything that might come from women and that has anything to do with anger would be a way to cut the way they relate to the world and to kind of make an intrusion in the way they're supposed to encounter and interact with the world. And anger is something that is not only granted to men very naturally, of course, but it's something that is expected from them, and that has been central to a lot of public representations of men across the history. I mean, this is a way to, if you look at pictures, if you look at paintings, if you look at art, I mean, the righteous anger of men is something that not only happens, but should be represented as
it's celebrated, as it were, yeah.
And the epitome of what humanity is about. It's also, and therefore, as we know, for example, in French, I mean, humanness is often expressed as homme, you know, the masculine term of humanity.
Right.
So it translates very precisely the way this division functions so that the men would be the locus of expression of anger, whereas the women are not. They're not supposed to recourse to this kind of emotion in order to exist.
NACIRA, there's another comment that's come from Gunjan, who says that she shared a challenge faced by many women. Well, I think it's a comment. She says that she shared a challenge faced by many women in Indian culture that doesn't support the open, assertive expression of anger, even when it's expressed in a healthy way. And then it turns into depression or anxiety. So yeah, actually, because, you know, suppressed anger itself can lead to many symptoms, such as high blood pressure, shooting of adrenaline, and so on and so forth. And if you're not expressing it, you are just kind of like bottling it up. In fact, there are studies that have been done where people have compared suppressing anger to like making a kind of pressure cooker like situation, you know.
And this is why, because anger is something that is being shut down as a mode of expression for women, this is why it is then very easy to describe them as being expressing all kind of emotions in such ways that are not acceptable, and they are being put beyond the boundaries of what is acceptable for them. And anger is obviously something that is not a recourse and should not be expressed as a recourse for them.
In fact, a while ago, NACIRA, you were talking about how men's anger is celebrated, how men are seen as strong and as you know, worthy of this righteous anger, where, you know, art is expressing that anger and so on and so forth. But when in reality, if you look at it this way, it's like the whole world is gaslighting itself, right? Because if you look at it this way, men's anger often leads to violence against women, misogyny. It could lead to harassment, all sorts of things. And women's anger is actually something which does the reverse, where it's trying to equalize things. So in fact, this suppressing of women's anger is actually, which is why I keep saying it, that is doubly wrong. It's like a psychological kind of torture, in fact, to not be able to express, you know, pain, for example, you know, which is another thing which is also denied to women, you know.
Of course, the purpose of anger is, to some extent, is diametrically opposite when it comes to men and women, as you said. And it's precisely because any kind of expression of anger from women would be a way to equalize things, to bring some more equality in the relation, to make space for expression of oppression, make it visible, make it explicit. This is precisely for this reason that anger is not supposed to be not only admitted but accepted from the wider society. It should remain as an illegitimate expression of emotion coming from women.
Okay, so Carmela is just getting ready with Soraya Chemaly's interview, who had written this book, Rage Becomes Her, which is the book that has inspired this episode, in which she talks about how it took her really long to realize that she actually was angry, you know, because she had also trained herself to actually not be angry, and, you know, not suppressing anger leads to, I mean, like, one part of getting over trauma is also being able to express anger, you know, and if you're denied that anger, it's difficult. There's one more thing that is coming. This Shalini, who's asking, had made this comment earlier. I missed it. Sorry, I'm coming to it now. It's about the wife jokes, you know, the nagging wife jokes. And this is something that had come up earlier also in one of our discussions on Smashboard, where we were talking about how, you know, men are constantly making jokes about, you know, the wife is always nagging, or the woman partner is always complaining about something. And, you know, this is a joke. There's like there's a ton of jokes on the nagging woman, you know, or the nagging female partner, as it were. So this actually really is quite offensive, you know, because that nagging woman who you're laughing at is actually, in reality, living in oppression, you know. So this is the way I think that women's anger is also delegitimized, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's any kind of expression, especially if women are good at it, because it's also about saying that sometimes the way women express their anger can be very effective and very convincing. So dismissing not only the way it is being expressed, but also the intensity of the expression of anger is one way to reduce any space and to shut down the space of expression. So, yeah, going to this nagging issue about women being too much on the back of their partners,
right? So
makes the work of reducing the space of expression of anger.
Also believing women, you know, like when women say that there is something wrong, and if they say it with anger, it's because they have tried everything else before. But even as women, between ourselves, sometimes we treat anger with a lot of suspicion. It's like, say it to me in another way. And that happens a lot also between white feminists and women of color, or between Savarna feminists and Dalit feminists, for example, where you're like, okay, don't say it to me with like so much anger. Just explain it to me better, you know. And people who are oppressed and who have been marginalized are tired, they're exhausted of holding back their anger. So as women, what do you think can we do to understand other women's anger, and to you know, like earlier Tania was saying, in fact, in her interview, that I don't know whether that part of the interview was played or not. Carmela will know better. But Tania had told me when we were talking yesterday is that quite often what happens is that when somebody expresses anger, in our culture, we are used to shutting down when we are faced with anger, you know, the thing about dismissal. Whereas what anger should do is that it should encourage you to understand that we need to go to the root of something, that there is a problem somewhere and we need to address it. So rather than just erasing somebody who's expressing anger, you should actually be able to listen to them and go to the root of the problem. How do you think can women between themselves, you know, with the different intersections, locations that we are at, how do you think should we be able to deal with each other's anger? Because it's not always easy, right?
Well, I think that, and this requires a lot of work on oneself, is to acknowledge it with an ability to remain silent in front of it, instead of making statements or being judgmental, or wanting in some maternalistic way, you know, condescendent way, explaining to the person how she should speak in order to be heard. I think that it's a very crucial task to learn to welcome the anger with silence, which doesn't mean that you are being you're not paying attention. But the silence can be a way to acknowledge the level of anger, and especially not
Right.
to try to invade the space that the other persons might need to express. And
Right.
this is something to implement and to be able to do on a, especially because most of the time the expression of anger is unexpected. So this is something that you have to activate very quickly and very effectively on the spot at the moment that it happens. You know, anger is not something that you can foresee. You can see it coming sometimes, but most of the time it just bursts out.
You're talking about this bursting out, and which is also probably why women coming out in the streets. I don't know whether Carmela will be able to play the footage, but you know, we were both together in the Carmela. We'll play Soraya Chemaly first, so please don't worry. Let's just first quickly go to Soraya Chemaly and what she says about this explosion of anger, in the sense that she said that it took her really long to actually acknowledge that you know, she had this anger and it was fine to have this anger.
Talking about her book, Soraya Chemaly says, if men knew how women are filled with white-hot rage when we cried, they would be staggered. We self-objectify and even lose the ability to recognize the physiological changes that indicate anger. Mainly though, we get sick. Anger has now been implicated in a whole array of illnesses that are casually dismissed as women's illnesses. Higher rates of chronic pain, autoimmune disorders, disordered eating, mental distress, anxiety, self-harm, depression. Anger affects our immune systems, our cardiovascular systems. Some studies even indicated that it affects mortality rates, particularly in black women with cancer.
Very pertinent points, actually, what I was saying. My mother gritting my teeth, her mother throwing plates. These are not things that are really funny if you look at it this way, because these are physiological problems that we are having, actually. Right?
Yeah, and I think what she expressed is that the way women are being raised in order to not acknowledge and not welcome their anger and the causes, the deep causes of their anger, leads them to lead a life of coping with all kind of disorders and illnesses and feelings of not achieving oneself, and sometimes even having, because of this state of mind, but also the kind of impact it can have on their health. This is also a way to reduce the level of expectation, shut down any kind of aspirations that they can have. I mean, there is a narrow connection between the lack of expression of anger, the impact it has on their body, and how it becomes embodied in women's daily life, and the deepest conclusion and the deepest fact, which is that they would resign a large range of aspirations and expectations because it comes to a too heavy cost. The cost is so high that they end up focusing on their health, focusing on some sort of trying to find a balance in their private life, in their intimate life, and completely quitting any political perspective in which they could change drastically, dramatically what they are experiencing.
Right.
Interesting that she would point to the fact that this is something that we can see in the bodies and the way the women's bodies are speaking to that.
There's one more comment from Tapasya Gupta. She says, in my previous workplace, my peers confused firmness and assertiveness with anger, whereas when they saw my male co-workers doing the same, it wasn't considered as such. So,
yeah, that's interesting that the trick that is being used in the interpretation of anger leads to the fact that it cannot be acknowledged and welcomed coming from women because it is supposed to be too aggressive and too assertive, whereas this is exactly what is expected from men. And this is how the the gender division in terms of expressing anger is being implemented and is being completely interiorized by men and women, much so that they become part of the oppression system, either women or men. I mean, this is something that we have also to be aware of, is how women can contribute to the ongoing expression of dismissive reception of how women express their anger.
Women are also kind of like labeled as negative and anger being seen as negative, where your expression of anger, which is actually the expression of something which is a problem, has now made you into a problem. So it's like you are, and this is something I think that Soraya Chemaly had said in her book, which is lying here. Let me just, you know, she wrote this book called Living a Feminist Life, and that's where she had mentioned this, and I think it was very interesting. This is something that we experience, all of us, quite often, where, you know, whether it's a you know, it's about protesting against racism, for example. You know, you were part of that big march that happens every year. I don't know if Carmela can pull out the Paris march. You know, yeah, you can play that on, and you know, there's also NACIRA was also watching in that march, and I took these videos, and the parts that I have picked up are actually very joyous, but it's actually also the joy of being able to express anger, because that's also something that women have fought for. It's like, we are going to come out in the streets and we are going to be angry, and we are happy that we are able to do that. So this ability to come out together and protest in the streets, come and take over the public space and say, yes, we are angry women, is also something that I think is the part that's joyous. I'll let Carmela play both the Paris videos, and Carmela, just tell me when you've finished playing them so I can come back. Or just, all right. So sorry, I thought I was on air, but I wasn't. So I'll just repeat what I said, NACIRA. These are images that I took in Paris a couple of years ago in the Dignity March, if I may call it that, and you were present in this march as well. I can't see the video that's being played right now, but you know, I took these images of women singing and dancing. There are a lot of women of color who came out in the street. And a lot of this march was about police violence, about racism in France, but was being led by women. And, you know, all this dancing and celebration that we see, a lot of times men tend to reject this or kind of like just laugh at it as, okay, it's just a party that's happening. In fact, when I was in Spain on the 8th of March, there were tons of women, thousands of women who came out on the streets in every single city, and I myself was in Barcelona. And the atmosphere was absolutely electric. And there were these very strong slogans that they were chanting, and it was them saying that we are taking up the public space and we are coming together, and expressing our anger. So all those slogans, all those posters that they're holding up, and Carmela is now playing the Barcelona videos that you can see from the 8th of March, very, very recently. And you know, these are images that we took, and we were all out there, and it was absolutely amazing to be there. And we knew that we were there because there is this anger that we feel. We know that there is oppression. We know that there are differences between us also, but it was very, very empowering to be out there, you know. So for example, the march that you did in Paris was also about police violence and racism, but women leading, really, women taking the lead, saying that we are going to be talking about this and we are here to say something, you know, because, and the book that you wrote, of course, about, you know, feminists and the Arab boy, right? That would be the translation. You also spoke about this, and women are like, okay, we are going to frame this discussion. Also, Me Too, you know, Me Too is a kind of like, you were talking about explosion earlier, and I was saying that it's like a pressure cooker. That's also in a way a kind of like coming out of anger. Would you say that, NACIRA? An explosion?
It's what is interesting is it has come from an unusually unexpected segment of women, which are women who are well off, higher middle class, doing great in their jobs. And that's interesting that the Me Too movement would come from them, because it says something of the level of oppression that is being experienced by those that are below them, those that cannot even protect their work, cannot protect themselves at the workplace, cannot protect themselves in their household, have to face all kind of oppressions and sexist experiences all across the spectrum. It's not just
Right.
about facing this from men who are in the same working sector. So I think that's interesting that if you can imagine that those women were so angry. I mean, we all remember some American white, very famous actresses saying that they could not speak because they were too angry to speak. They were completely silenced by their own anger. And then months after, they were able to articulate something about that. So what does it say of women that are not even allowed to exist to the level of achievement that those women are experiencing?
Absolutely. Also, there are a lot of other aspects to anger, and we could just go on carrying on this conversation for really long. We have only 4 minutes left now, so just maybe perhaps your concluding remarks on the way we need to negotiate anger and accept women's anger, really, as an attempt to open a dialogue, as an attempt to point out to a problem that exists and not see the anger as a problem in itself, right?
I would very much go back to this expression of Sarah Ahmed, which is the killjoy, and make the point about the fact that when women end up having to be killjoyers in the conversation, about having to disrupt the conversation or the ordinary, life as it is because the anger that they have to express is something that leads to major existential issues for them. And if we are not paying attention, and I'm also including myself as someone who has a quite very good position in the French society now, although I can be seen as a colored woman, I think this is something that we have to work on and be more able to welcome this expression of anger as something
Right.
that is the beginning of a collective answer to problems that cannot be just reduced to individual experiences. This is a
Right.
collective experience that is being through this anger.
Also, in a way, a call for a demand to people to change what it is that makes women angry, rather than asking them not to be angry, which again is also a community effort in a sense, where anger, rather than as a tool for oppression or a kind of expression of entitlement, that's not what it is for women a lot of times. I mean, of course, women can also reproduce patriarchal behaviors, but on the whole, this is how it should be seen. So thank you so much, NACIRA. We were a little alone there because we had trouble tech problems, but thank you so much for being with Smashboard and steadily discussing this. There's so many things that we can talk about, and anger really is a very important subject, I think, especially for women. We have to be positively angry and keep fighting for that which is that makes us angry, and hopefully continue making a dialogue and be happy that at least some of us have been able to express that anger, and with empathy listen to other women who we need to listen to, and who sometimes we don't, because as I was telling Tanya in the interview that I did with her, that I met a white woman who's a very strong woman, angry but for the good reason. She fights fraud, but she really doesn't. She's angry with all the women who even say that they are victims or survivors. So there are lots of things to unpack over there. Thank you so very much, NACIRA, for joining us from Abu Dhabi. And earlier we had ROKHAYA from Paris, and we also had a pre-recorded interview with Belle, OLID, as well as TANIA VERGE from Barcelona. Sorry about the tech problems that we had today, but we will come back with new ways of doing this in a cheap and effective manner. Thanks for watching. Keep following Smashboard, and we'll be back with another episode of Smash Live. Thank you so much, Carmela. Thank you so much, NACIRA. And with that, goodbye from me.
Smashboard, your digital ally to smash patriarchy.